She
Look at
found
me.
an injured elf in the
Focus
snow,
on my voice.
not knowing he was the Elven king.
You can't give up now.
Alara moved through the snow with careful steps, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She carried a small basket filled with herbs she had collected during the morning. Each plant had a purpose, some for healing, some for warmth, and some to soothe the heart. The cold did not bother her. It had never bothered her. It was the quiet that pressed against her chest, a loneliness she had long accepted. Alara had lived in this village her entire life. It was small, with only a few dozen homes, a single blacksmith, and a chapel that rarely rang its bell. People came and went, but most of the villagers stayed close to the earth, tending their animals, their gardens, and their small fires. Life was simple, predictable, safe. Yet Alara had always felt the forest calling her. Sometimes she would wander its paths for hours, listening to the whispers of the trees and watching the snowflakes fall like tiny stars. It was there, she thought, that something greater waited, something she could not yet name. On this morning, however, the forest felt different. A strange hush lingered in the air, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Alara tightened her grip on the basket and followed a narrow path that twisted between tall pines. The snow crunched softly under her boots. Then she saw it, a figure lying face down in the snow, half covered by ice and frost. At first she thought it was a tree stump, but the shape was wrong. It moved. Alara's heart leaped. She ran forward, falling to her knees beside the figure. It was a man, no, not quite a man. His features were too delicate, his ears pointed in the shape of the elves she had read about in old stories. His golden hair was streaked with frost, and his cloak was torn, revealing armor beneath, broken and scratched. Blood had frozen into his skin, and his chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. "Oh, please," Alara whispered, fear and urgency tightening in her chest. She had seen injured travelers before, but never one like this. There was something otherworldly about him, a quiet power that seemed to pulse even in his weakened state. Carefully, she lifted him, wrapping him in her cloak and pressing her body against his to give warmth. The journey back to her small cottage was slow. The forest seemed endless, the snow deeper than it should have been. Yet every time Alara looked down at him, she felt a strange reassurance. He was alive. That was all that mattered. When she finally reached the cottage, she lit the hearth with trembling hands. The fire roared to life, casting shadows across the wooden walls. She laid him gently on her bed, fetching clean blankets and pouring warm water to soothe his body. For hours she worked silently, wiping frost from his face, tending his wounds and muttering prayers under her breath. At last he stirred. His eyes, a bright and piercing green, opened slowly. They were eyes that had seen centuries, filled with pain, wisdom, and sorrow. He did not speak, only stared at her as if searching for something he could not name. "Who are you?" Alara asked softly. Her voice was barely audible, trembling in the stillness of the room. He made no sound. Only his hand twitched, reaching toward her as if to ask for reassurance. Alara took it gently, feeling the cold of his fingers against her warm skin. A shiver ran through her. She did not know why, but she felt a connection she could not explain, as if fate itself had placed him in her path. Days passed. Alara tended him carefully, feeding him warm broth and herbs, wrapping his wounds with skill and patience. Slowly he regained strength, though he still spoke nothing of who he was. The villagers began to whisper. They noticed the strange elf living in Alara's cottage and avoided the path near her home. Some said he was cursed, others said he was a spirit of the forest. Alara ignored them. She could feel the truth in her bones. He was more than any ordinary being, yet she had no way to prove it. At night, she would sit beside the bed, reading quietly to herself while he slept. Sometimes she thought she heard him whispering in dreams, words that sounded like distant songs. They were words she could not understand, yet they left a warmth in her chest, a longing she could not name. One evening, a storm swept through the village. Snow howled against the windows and the wind shook the walls as if it were trying to enter. Alara stayed close to him, holding his hand to keep him warm. Suddenly, he awoke. His eyes opened wide and he gasped for air. "They are coming," he whispered, his voice low and strained. "You must be careful." Alara's heart raced. "Who is coming?" she asked. "What do you mean?" He shook his head, unable or unwilling to answer. His gaze, however, held a warning she could not ignore. Outside, the wind seemed to carry a sound faint, like the rustle of movement through the forest. Shadows passed beneath the trees, shapes that should not exist. Alara hugged him closer, fear and resolve battling in her chest. The storm raged through the night. She stayed awake, watching him, feeling the strange pull of his presence. It was not love, not yet, but something like destiny brushing against her heart. Every time he moved, every time he breathed, it was as if the world held its breath with them. In the early hours of dawn, the storm subsided. Snow lay deep and pure across the village and the forest. The elf sat up slowly, the firelight casting sharp shadows across his face. He looked at Alara, his eyes softer now, filled with something like gratitude or perhaps something deeper. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "You do not know who I am. You could leave me here to die." Alara shook her head. "I could not. I do not know why, but I could not leave you." She felt her cheeks flush. "Someone needs to care. Someone needs to help." He studied her for a long moment, and she felt the weight of his gaze. It was not judgment, not exactly, but something far more intense, a recognition, as if he had been searching for her in 1,000 other places and found her at last. "Betrayed," he said suddenly, a single word that hung heavy in the room. Alara's heart skipped. "Betrayed." He did not answer. Instead, he closed his eyes again, leaning back against the blankets as if the word itself had exhausted him. Alara could only sit beside him, her hand holding his, feeling the warmth and life that remained in him. The morning came, pale and quiet. The sun struggled through the heavy clouds, casting a silver light across the snow. Alara prepared breakfast, and the elf ate slowly, still silent, still distant. Yet every now and then he would look at her, and she felt the weight of a story unspoken, of a world beyond the forest, of power and loss, of secrets she could not yet know. By midday, Alara realized something had changed. She did not know what it was, only that she could no longer imagine her life without him. Even if he left, even if he was a stranger or a king of a faraway land, he had left a mark on her soul. That night, as the wind whispered against the walls, she awoke to find him sitting at the window, staring at the forest. Snowflakes clung to the glass, glittering in the moonlight. "You will not understand," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "They will come and you will not be safe." Alara stepped closer. "Then we face them together," she said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. "I will not leave you." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time she thought she saw something like hope in his eyes. Yet even as he smiled faintly, the shadows outside shifted. The forest seemed to darken, and the snow stirred without wind. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. The world beyond her village was waking. Forces she could not see were stirring. And she had no idea that the man she had saved, the strange elf with the golden hair and piercing green eyes, was not an ordinary traveler. He was a king. And danger had already begun to follow him. The morning sun broke over the snow-covered village, casting pale light across the frozen landscape. The forest beyond Alara's cottage seemed endless, a silent world of white and gray, its trees heavy with frost. Yet for the first time, the forest did not feel lonely. She glanced at the elf as he rested on the bed, his golden hair catching the sunlight, and something stirred deep inside her. He was awake now, though still weak. Each movement seemed careful, measured, as if he were carrying a burden that could not be set down. He did not speak much, but when he did, his voice was soft and distant, like the echo of a memory. Alara had spent the morning preparing a warm broth. The steam curled through the cold air, filling the room with a smell of herbs and comfort. She sat on a stool beside the bed, watching him sip carefully. "You are stronger than you appear," she said quietly. He looked at her then, his green eyes meeting hers. For a long moment neither spoke. It was not silence exactly. It was a pause heavy with unspoken words, with histories that belonged to other lands, other lifetimes. "I have been," he began slowly, "away from home for far too long." His voice faltered as if the words themselves were painful. "Your home?" Alara asked gently. "Where is it?" He shook his head, refusing to answer. Yet she could feel the weight behind the question. Whatever he had left behind, it had cost him much. She could sense the sorrow, the loss, the unspoken betrayals. Days passed like this. Alara tended him and he rested, sometimes speaking in riddles or fragments, sometimes watching the snow fall silently outside. Slowly she began to understand more about him. He was not merely a traveler or a warrior. He carried the presence of someone with authority, someone who had been expected to lead, to command, to protect. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, Alara decided to ask the question that had been on her mind since the first moment she saw him. "Why were you in the forest?" she asked, her voice careful. "Why were you hurt?" He looked away, staring at the fire as if it held the answer. "I was betrayed," he said quietly, almost to himself, "by someone I trusted more than I should have." Alara's heart tightened. "Betrayed? How?" He shook his head again, his expression shadowed. "It is not safe to speak of it yet." Then, after a long pause, he added, "They are still searching for me." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. "Who is searching for you?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes, breathing slowly. When he opened them, there was a sharpness, a focus that made Alara catch her breath. "Those who wish to take what is mine," he said finally. "The throne, the land, the people, all of it." Alara blinked, unsure if she understood. "Throne? You mean you are royalty?" He hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Yes, but it is a throne lost to me now, and until I reclaim it, I cannot return." Her mind raced. She had known there was something extraordinary about him, something beyond ordinary life, but royalty, a kingdom. She felt a mixture of awe and fear. "Then you are a king." He did not answer directly. Instead, he leaned back against the blankets, closing his eyes. The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the sharp lines and delicate features that seemed almost unreal. "I do not expect you to understand," he said after a moment, "and I cannot ask you to leave your life for mine. This path is dangerous and those who follow me are cruel." Alara shook her head. "I will not leave," she said firmly. "If you are in danger, then I will be with you. I cannot abandon you now." He opened his eyes again, and for the first time she thought she saw something like relief. It was brief, hidden behind the sadness that lingered in his gaze, but it was there. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen around the village. Animals avoided the forest's edge, their eyes wide and fearful. Trees groaned under the weight of frost, though no wind stirred their branches. And at night, the whispers of the forest grew louder, carrying voices that seemed almost human, yet not. Alara could feel it, a tension in the air, as if the world itself knew of the elf's presence. She watched him carefully, noticing the way his hand twitched when he sensed movement outside, the way his gaze shifted toward the shadows beyond the windows. He was alert even in weakness, aware of dangers she could not see. One evening, while the snow fell thick and silent outside, he finally spoke of his journey. "I was forced to flee my kingdom," he said, his voice low. "My brother, he sought to claim everything. He used magic I could not counter. I had no choice but to leave, to hide, and to wait for the right moment to return." Alara listened intently, her hands folded in her lap. "And now," she asked softly, "will you return?" He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I must, but I cannot go alone. The forest will not be safe, and neither will the road. Darkness follows me, and if I am not careful, it will consume everything I hold dear. Alara felt a lump in her throat. Then we will face it together, she said quietly. I will not let you go alone. I will help you in any way I can. For a moment he seemed startled, as if her words carried more weight than he expected. Then he nodded slowly, a shadow of a smile crossing his face. You are brave, he said, and perhaps foolish. But I am grateful. As the days passed, their bond grew. Alara began to learn small things about him, his love for music, the way he would hum quietly while tending to wounds, the careful way he observed everything around him. He learned about her too, her dreams, her fears, her longing to see the world beyond the forest. There were moments of quiet intimacy, though not in a romantic sense. Moments when they sat together by the fire, hands brushing, eyes meeting, words unnecessary. Each moment carried a weight, a recognition of shared loneliness and understanding. One night, while the moon hung high and silver in the sky, the elf stood at the window, staring into the forest. The snow glittered like tiny stars, and the trees were black silhouettes against the moonlight. They will come, he said softly, sooner than I hoped. Alara moved beside him, placing a hand gently on his arm. Then we prepare, she said. We face them together. He looked at her then, truly looked, and something shifted in his expression. Gratitude, fear, and something else, something like hope, mingled in his green eyes. You do not know what you are offering, he said quietly. I do, Alara replied, and I do not care. I will not leave you. That night sleep was uneasy. The forest seemed alive with movement, the shadows stretching closer, the whispers louder. Alara woke several times, finding him sitting awake, eyes fixed on the window, hand resting lightly on hers. She felt the pulse of his magic, subtle, strong, protective, and shivered. Morning came, pale and quiet. The snow lay undisturbed, but the sense of watchfulness lingered. Alara prepared breakfast while he watched silently, and when he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost fragile. There is more to tell, he said. Secrets I have carried for centuries, burdens I hope to lay down. But you have drawn them out, whether you meant to or not. Alara paused. I do not care about burdens, she said firmly. If they are yours, I will bear them with you. That is what it means to care. He studied her, and for the first time there was a flicker of something like warmth in his gaze. Yet the weight of his past was heavy, and he turned away, staring once more into the forest. Hours later, there was a knock at the door. Alara's heart jumped. Visitors were rare, especially in winter. She approached cautiously, her hand tightening around the handle. Outside stood a figure cloaked in deep green, face shadowed. I seek the elf who hides here, the figure said, voice firm but not unkind. The one who fled the northern kingdom. He must return. Alara froze, her mind racing. She turned to the elf who was now standing behind her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed a tension she had never seen. He cannot come, he said quietly. Not yet. It is not safe. The figure hesitated, then nodded slowly. Then he will not be safe for long, they said. And with that they vanished into the forest, leaving a silence that pressed against the cottage walls. Alara felt a shiver. Danger was no longer distant. It had arrived. And though fear pressed against her chest, she knew one thing clearly. She would not abandon him. Not now, not ever. As night fell again, they sat together by the fire, the wind howling outside. The elf finally allowed a small smile, faint but real. Perhaps, he said softly, the forest itself has sent you to me, or perhaps fate has finally turned its gaze. Alara reached for his hand, holding it gently. Then we face whatever comes, she said. Together. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent and pure. But in the quiet, shadows moved and whispers drifted through the trees. The world beyond the village was stirring, and the journey that would change both their lives had already begun. The forest was quieter than usual. Snow lay thick on the ground, muffling every sound. Alara and the elf moved carefully through the trees, following a narrow path that twisted deeper into the mountains. Each step was slow, the snow sometimes reaching above their knees. The wind bit at their faces, but neither of them spoke of the cold. There were far more dangerous things ahead. Ilara walked beside him, her hands wrapped in thick mittens, a scarf around her neck. She could feel the strength returning to his body, but she also knew he was not yet fully healed. Every now and then he would pause, placing a hand on a tree, scanning the shadows beyond the trunks. It was clear he was aware of every sound, every movement. She could sense the tension that never left him, a tension that even she with all her courage felt pressing against her chest. "Are we close?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. "Closer than before," he replied quietly, "but the path is dangerous. The closer we get, the more they will try to stop us." Ilara nodded. She had never been on such a journey before, never faced danger like this. Yet with each step beside him, she felt a strength she had not known she possessed. She had survived winters alone, healed travelers, and walked forests where shadows seemed alive. This, she realized, was different. This was a test not only of courage but of heart. They stopped for a moment to rest beside a frozen stream. The elf knelt, breaking the ice carefully, and drank deeply. Ilara watched him, noticing the way the light caught in his golden hair, the way his eyes reflected the pale winter sun. She felt a strange pull toward him, a mixture of fear, admiration, and something like longing. "You are not like anyone I have ever met," she said softly. He looked at her then, a shadow of a smile crossing his face. "And you are braver than most who walk this land," he said. "I should have expected it from someone who saved me from the forest." Ilara felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "I only did what I could. You were injured, you needed help. And yet," he said quietly, "you stayed, even when you had no reason to." The journey resumed. Hours passed as the forest grew darker, the trees taller, their shadows longer. They crossed frozen rivers and climbed steep hills, the elf always watching the path ahead, his senses alert. Ilara followed, trusting him, learning from him. She had never known life outside her village, and now the world was vast, dangerous, and full of wonders she had only imagined. At night, they made camp under a canopy of trees. The wind howled through the branches, and the snow fell in quiet sheets around them. Ilara helped him build a small fire, gathering dry wood from beneath the snow. He watched her carefully as if each movement mattered. "Do you always travel alone?" she asked, handing him a bowl of warm broth. He shook his head. "No, there were many who fought beside me. Many who trusted me, but betrayal is a shadow that follows too closely." Ilara nodded. She understood loss, understood how people could change and leave scars that never healed. "Then I will not betray you," she said firmly. "I will stay with you, no matter what comes." For a moment his eyes softened. "You are a rare soul," he said. "I should have found you sooner, in another time, in another life." Ilara felt a flutter in her chest, but she did not respond. Words felt small compared to the world around them, compared to the dangers that awaited. The next morning they resumed their journey. The mountains rose sharply, cliffs covered in ice and snow. Every step required care, and the elf guided her, teaching her where to step, how to hold balance. She trusted him completely, though fear lingered in the back of her mind. As they reached the top of a ridge, the elf paused. He looked down into the valley below, where a ruined city lay buried beneath snow and ice. Towers had collapsed, walls broken, and the streets were empty, silent except for the wind. "This is where my kingdom lies," he said softly, his voice filled with sorrow. "Once proud, now shattered, my brother has taken everything, the throne, the people, the land, all lost." Ilara felt her heart tighten. "We can reclaim it," she said. "We can face him." He shook his head slowly. "It will not be easy. He is cruel and cunning. And he has learned dark magic that I cannot match alone." Ilara reached for his hand. "Then we will do it together," she said. "I will not leave you." He looked at her, eyes green and deep, full of something she could not name. "You are brave," he said again. "Perhaps braver than I deserve." They descended into the ruined city carefully. Snow covered the streets, but the damage was clear. Homes were broken, towers crumbled, and the signs of magic lingered in the air, a faint hum, a spark of light that seemed alive. The elf led her to a hidden entrance beneath a collapsed building, a secret way into the palace. Inside, the air was cold and heavy with dust. Shadows stretched across the walls, and every step echoed through the empty halls. The elf moved ahead, cautious and silent. Alara followed, her heart pounding. This was the place of his past, the place of his power, the place where his brother waited. They reached the throne room where the elf's brother awaited. He was tall, with dark hair and a sharp expression. His eyes glowed faintly with magic, and he smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. "You have returned," he said, voice echoing in the chamber. "I wondered when you would come back to claim what is yours, but you are too late." The elf stepped forward. "This throne belongs to me," he said firmly, "and I will take it back." His brother laughed. "You are weak, alone, wounded, and foolish to think you can fight me." Alara felt a chill, but she did not move. She stood beside the elf, holding his hand lightly. She could feel the tension in him, the control he was trying to maintain. She knew his power, even now, was strong, and she knew that together they had a chance. The brother raised his hands, magic swirling around him, and the room filled with a cold, dark energy. The elf responded, and the air crackled with power, though he was weaker than his brother. The ground trembled and shadows moved across the walls. Alara watched in awe and fear. She could feel the magic in the room, the tension, the danger. But she also felt something else, the strength of the elf, the courage that had brought them here, the bond that had grown between them. As the battle of wills unfolded, the brother spoke, his voice sharp. "You cannot win. Your friends, your allies, all gone." The elf looked at her, eyes filled with determination. "I have more than allies," he said softly. "I have someone who believes in me, someone who stands with me." Alara's heart swelled. She had never expected to feel this way, standing in a ruined palace facing a powerful enemy. Yet she knew it was true. She would not leave him. She could not. The brother's magic surged, a wave of darkness that threatened to overwhelm the room. The elf raised his hands, fighting back, and the energy clashed in the center, a storm of light and shadow. Alara felt the heat of it, the power, but she held firm, her presence a silent support. Then, in a moment of calm, the elf's brother sneered. "If I cannot take your life, I will take hers." Alara's heart stopped. She stepped forward, fear and courage mixing inside her. "You will not touch her," the elf said, his voice low and fierce. The shadows in the room shifted, and the brother's eyes widened. He had not expected the strength of their bond, the power of trust and loyalty. For a moment, the air seemed to still. The elf took a deep breath. "This ends now," he said, and with a surge of energy he pushed forward, breaking the brother's spell, shattering the darkness. The room shook, dust falling from the ceiling, but the brother stumbled, surprised and weakened. Alara felt relief wash over her. She had seen the courage in him, the strength he had hidden, and she knew they could face whatever came next. Yet the battle was not over. Shadows lingered, and danger had not vanished completely. As the elf's brother retreated, disappearing into the corridors, he called back, "This is not the end. You will pay for this." Alara and the elf stood together in the throne room, the air still trembling with magic. He looked at her, his green eyes softening. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said. "And you are braver than I thought," she replied, her voice steady. For a moment they simply stood there, two souls connected by fate, courage, and a bond that neither fully understood. The ruined city around them was quiet now, but they knew the journey was far from over. Outside, the wind howled through the broken towers, carrying the promise of more challenges, more trials. Yet for the first time, Alara felt hope. She had found something greater than safety in her village. She had found courage, purpose, and the beginnings of a love she did not yet name. The elf turned to her, his expression solemn but kind. "We must prepare," he said softly. The road ahead is long and the darkness will not wait. Alara nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination. Together, they would face whatever came. The throne could be reclaimed, the kingdom restored, and perhaps, in time, their hearts could heal along with the land. But as they left the throne room, a faint shadow moved in the distance, watching, waiting. The story was far from over. The journey, the battles, and the secrets still to be revealed were only beginning. The ruined city lay under a pale winter sun, silent except for the faint whistle of the wind through broken towers. Snow drifted across the streets, settling in empty courtyards and shattered walls. Alara stood beside the elf on a hill overlooking the palace. The journey to reclaim the throne had brought them here, to the final steps of a path filled with danger, loss, and courage. He turned to her, green eyes steady and full of a quiet determination. "This is it," he said. "Beyond those walls lies my brother and the crown he stole. We cannot fail." Alara nodded, gripping her cloak tightly. Fear fluttered in her chest, but it was mixed with resolve. She had walked through storms, mountains, and forests with him. She had faced shadows and whispers in the dark. And now, standing at the edge of a ruined kingdom, she felt a courage she had never known before. They descended toward the palace, moving quietly through the snow. The gates were broken, the walls crumbled, but the signs of magic lingered, faint but dangerous. Every step demanded care. Alara followed him closely, trusting his judgment, feeling the pulse of his power even in his weakened state. Inside the throne room, the air was thick and cold. The dark magic that had corrupted it lingered like a shadow, curling along the floor and walls. His brother stood at the center, eyes sharp, a cruel smile playing across his lips. He had expected them to arrive, but perhaps he had not expected the strength that came from their bond. "You have returned," the brother said, voice echoing. "And you think you can reclaim what is mine?" The elf stepped forward, shoulders squared. "The throne belongs to me," he said, "and I will not let it fall to greed and darkness." Alara moved beside him, her hand brushing his. She could feel his tension, the effort to control his magic, to face the enemy who had caused so much pain. "We are ready," she said softly. Together, the brother's smile faded. He raised his hands and dark energy began to swirl around him. The room trembled. Alara could feel it pressing against her chest, yet she did not step back. She stayed close to the elf, her presence a steadying force. "You underestimate what we can do," the elf said, voice low but firm. Energy surged from him, bright and powerful, though still tempered by caution. "It ends today," the brother sneered. "You cannot stop me," he said. "You are too weak." But the elf did not answer with words. He focused, drawing on the strength he had hidden, the courage that had grown through his journey, and the bond he shared with Alara. Light and shadow collided in the room, a storm of magic and power. Alara watched in awe. She had never seen such a display of energy. But more than the magic, she felt something else, the heart of a king, the will to protect, the desire to right what had been wronged. Suddenly, the brother launched a final strike, a wave of darkness meant to overwhelm them both. The elf met it, his power steady, and the clash sent tremors across the palace floor. Alara felt the heat of the energy, the pull of the shadows, but she held firm. She was more than a witness. She was a part of his strength, a grounding presence that anchored him when the world seemed to tip. The clash continued, and slowly the brother faltered. His energy wavered. The bond between the elf and Alara, built over days of trust, courage, and shared hardships, proved stronger than the cruel magic. With a surge of light, the brother stumbled back, his power broken for the moment. "This ends," the elf said again, voice steady. "You cannot hold what is not yours." The brother's eyes widened and he vanished into the shadows, retreating from the throne room. The palace seemed to sigh, the dark energy dissipating, leaving the room lighter, almost warm. Alara stepped closer to the elf. "It is over," she whispered. He looked at her, green eyes softening. "Not entirely," he said, "but the first step has been taken. The throne is within reach and the kingdom can begin to heal. They walked together to the center of the throne room. The air seemed lighter here, the magic of the place responding to his presence. He touched the throne, and for a moment the ruin faded in his mind's eye. He could see it restored, alive, the halls filled with laughter and life, the people safe and free. I can reclaim it, he said softly, but it is more than a crown, it is responsibility, duty, and redemption. Alara placed her hand on his arm, and you will not face it alone. I am with you. He smiled faintly, a smile that carried both relief and gratitude. You have given me strength I did not know I possessed, he said, more than anyone ever has. Together, they stepped out onto the balcony of the throne room. The snow had stopped, and pale sunlight reflected across the city. Ruins remained, yes, but there was a sense of hope, of new beginnings. The elf looked out over the kingdom, and Alara felt the weight of the moment. The journey had changed them both, and yet it was only the beginning of what they could become. I never imagined, he said quietly, that someone like you would stand beside me, that someone like you would care. Alara shook her head. I never imagined this world existed, she replied softly. But now I know it does, and now I know we can face it together. He turned to her, eyes searching, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was not just love, not just connection, but a deep understanding, a bond forged through trials, courage, and trust. Perhaps this is what I was meant to find, he said. Not just a kingdom, not just a throne, but you. Alara felt her heart lift, and though words felt small, she reached for his hand. And I was meant to find you, she said softly. For hours they stood together, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The world felt quiet, calm, as if it too recognized the turning of fate. The kingdom had begun to heal, and so had they. As night fell, the palace was empty but alive with possibility. The elf sat on the restored throne, and Alara beside him, the warmth of the fire in the hall reflecting in their eyes. They spoke little, for no words were needed. Their journey, their trust, and their courage had already spoken. Outside, the forest whispered in the wind, carrying a faint promise of future challenges. But for now, the danger had passed. The shadows were gone, the kingdom beginning to heal, and the bond between them stronger than any magic. The elf stood and looked out the window, moonlight casting silver across his golden hair. The road ahead will still be difficult, he said quietly. But with you beside me, I feel I can face anything, Alara smiled. And you will, she said. We will. In that quiet moment, she realized something profound. Courage was not the absence of fear. Strength was not the absence of weakness. Love, trust, and companionship were what made them truly powerful. She had walked forests alone, healed strangers, and faced storms. But she had never felt the certainty she felt now, standing beside him, facing the dawn of a new kingdom together. The elf turned to her, eyes soft but steady. You saved more than me, he said quietly. You saved the kingdom and yourself. Alara shook her head, a small laugh escaping her lips. Perhaps we saved each other, she said. He smiled, the first full smile she had seen, warm and real. Perhaps, he agreed. The night passed, peaceful and calm, with the snow settling like a blanket over the city. Outside, faint stars glimmered and the forest waited in quiet anticipation. The past was behind them, the present clear, and the future, though uncertain, held the promise of hope, love, and renewal. Together, they had reclaimed the throne, restored a kingdom, and discovered the strength of trust, courage, and heart. And though the world beyond the palace might bring new trials, one thing was certain: neither would face them alone. The elf took Alara's hand, holding it gently. No matter what comes, he said softly, we face it together. Alara squeezed his hand, a promise as real as the snow beneath their feet. Together, she said, and in the quiet, under the stars and the moonlit sky, a new story began, one of courage, redemption, and love that would outlast even the longest winter.